Was really interested at The Athletic this week. They went over their big board, the top 50 players that could be dealt at MLB's trade deadline, including a few Baltimore Orioles on the list. Joining us now, always a pleasure to welcome back to the program, Eno Sarris, who covers baseball for The Athletic and was part of this piece this week. Eno, it's Glenn in Baltimore. It's always good to chat with you, man. Thank you for taking the time for us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
If I could, because I'm going to bring you on to talk about a piece, but I want to ask you about a name that is not in that piece, but is very relevant to us, and I'm interested in where you are with the conversation, because there's been a lot of just mumblings about the possibility that the Orioles would consider shopping Adley Rutschman this year. And he's not a rental, so I know why he wouldn't be high on this list, but it is relevant, the idea that you don't want to trade a player when, they're only a rental. You want to try to maximize value, and we don't know what the thought process is with Samuel Basallo, whether they believe that he can be a full-time catcher. I think it's an interesting conversation. I don't expect them to do it, but I feel like it's worthy of conversation about whether or not it should be at least in the thought process for them.
Yeah, no, I think they should think about it. I mean, for whatever reason, the pitching just really hasn't gone into full gear, and they've paid attention to it. They've traded for Shane Baz. They've traded for Trevor Rogers. They've had big prospects like Grayson come up, and, it just hasn't clicked for them pitching wise. And, honestly, even on the hitting side, sometimes it hasn't been as advertised, considering this group of young players and the promise that they supposedly had coming up. So I think in some ways you say, hey, we could keep them for this extra year, or we could get a real shot of talent and major league ready talent and potentially some arms that could step into the rotation, because Trevor Rogers is going to be gone next year. And we're kind of lacking in, if you're playing the role of Baltimore front office, you might think we're lacking, front end starting rotation talent, and you're not going to necessarily get that. I know that Pete Crow Armstrong was a trade deadline, piece that was traded, and so everyone thinks, oh, this is great. But normally for a rental piece, you're not trading away great prospects, and you don't end up getting a lot for it. But for a non-rental, you'll get you might get a real prospect. But I think it's worth talking about with Basallo. I see him as a regular catcher. I know that there's been some controversy about playing through injury for him.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't know from the outside how serious that is. It is a serious thing for a catcher to have to be able to kind of play through some of those dings, because it's just that kind of position. But if they think that's a serious problem, then you keep Adley around. You give yourself more time to see if Basallo can do it. That's the safer way of doing things. But if they think, no, he's shown since that he can play through some stuff, and we've given him this, we've given him the message, then you might consider it, because Rutschman is the biggest piece that would bring them back something. You're trading away just pieces that at the deadline, like Taylor Ward and Trevor Rogers, Andrew Kittredge, things that aren't nailed down for next year. We're free agents. You're not going to get that much for those guys.
I think the most interesting name among the Orioles names that were on your guys' list was Yennier Cano, just because, to the point, he's not a rental. He's a guy you still have a lot of control over. Is that maybe a similar thought process of, but you have the opportunity to perhaps sell to another team, this guy could be your closer or your leverage arm, and get a higher price because of it?
Yeah. At least with Rutschman, though, you have a little bit of like, well, we trade Rutschman and Basallo's our everyday guy, and we kind of have an internal replacement. With Cano,
they do not have a lot of leverage arms. They are really lacking in terms of leverage arms.
So if you do that, then you have to go back out into the market and say, okay, we traded Cano because we think we can go back out in the market. But I think a player of Cano's quality might cost like $30 million in 2 years, something like that. I mean, it's not going to be super cheap, and it might take multiple years in a way that that Baltimore has not been shown to really want to do on the market, especially for pitching and free agency.
He is Eno Sarris, and he's with us here on GCR. The tricky part about talking about the Orioles and the deadline is we don't think they're very good, and yet they're a game and a half out of a playoff spot because the American League kind of stinks. Where do they – because there's still an argument on the other side of this conversation, right? Particularly – I know if a Joe Ryan really is on the market and he's got another year of control, I'd be very interested in Joe Ryan. Like, I don't even think that an Orioles team that sort of hangs around and gets into the playoffs is a threat to win, but I don't think they should be giving up on the hope of trying to do it next year either. Where would they need to be for you to think that they should definitively go one way or the other at the deadline? Like, if they're in the position they're in right now where they're not good but they're still very close to the playoffs, should they be selling Rodgers and Ward? Do they need to fall back further to do that? And if they're in this position, can you justify buying, or do you look and say, hey, you're just not that good, why are you giving away any of your assets?
Yeah, I mean, that's what you're making the case for what might be the most likely thing, which is nothing happens.
Yeah.
But it is really weird. The American League, there are only 2 teams that have a positive run differential. There are only 2 teams in the entire American League that have scored more runs than they've allowed. So the American League is pretty stinky right now, and so that makes an opportunity for any sort of team. What I would want if I was running Baltimore, I think I just want to see the offense click. I just want to see the offense click. I'd want to see Jackson, play well for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I'd want to see them score some runs. It looks like the ball's getting more lively recently. I'd want to see some home runs, and I just want to see if you guys, if that offense, because that's, honestly, I could. Do you remember the Diamondbacks against the Rangers?
Yeah, sure.
Like the Rangers didn't have a quality staff; they just had a quality lineup, and so that's what I'd be looking for. If you're supporting Baltimore and you want them to buy at the end, and Ryan is a great name to think about because he not only helps you this year, he helps you next year. And so you're like, hey, the lineup is clicking.
But
we think of what we thought of is going to happen, and now we need another pitcher.
What could possibly be the cost for a Joe Ryan, though? Like, we're just talking about what it might cost to, what you may be able to get for Adley Rutschman. Now it's Joe Ryan that we're discussing. Like, do the Orioles even have that at this point? We're talking about an organization that is very light on prospects. Do they even have the horses to go get a Joe Ryan for the next year and a half? Oh. I think
right.
Yeah, I apologize. You're cutting in and out. We'll try to make sure we can clean that up. Sarris of The Athletic is with us here on GCR. Griffin will link up on Twitter their story, their big board of players that could be dealt at the trade deadline. It's 50 guys. It includes a number of Orioles. I mentioned they have Yennier Cano on that list, which would maybe surprise you. In fact, he's number 21 on that list, but in the highest Oriole on that list, which kind of catches you a bit off guard. Then Taylor Ward is at number 23, Ryan Helsley at 31 among the Orioles on that list. And the Cano thing kind of jumps out at you, like, why would you be trading away Yennier Cano? And to me, it's just he's a guy that looks like a reliable leverage arm that everybody is looking for. And considering that he wouldn't just be a rental, you have a real opportunity to turn that into an actual price that you can get if you were to shop Yennier Cano. So, yeah, we'll link that up on Twitter at Glenn Clark Radio here in just a second. Sarris of The Athletic is with us. Yeah, is there any chance the Orioles could even pay the price for Joe Ryan?
I'm not so familiar with the minor league resources that the Orioles have.
Yeah, that's because there's not much at this point, unfortunately.
So I don't know. I know that the Twins have had a heck of a time with pitching injury, and they just lost another one of their young pitchers to elbow surgery. So maybe maybe just healthy pitching is maybe it doesn't have to be the very front end prospects. Maybe that would get it done. But yeah, I can't tell you that I don't know. So I think we're making the case here for something quite boring.
Oh yeah, which is just do nothing. Just keep rolling it out there and
Yeah.
hoping for the best, and go from there.
Maybe get a rental reliever.
Yeah, that sounds very Orioles. Let's go purgatory is what we're saying. Is there? I bring up the idea of acquiring pitchers with control, and another name that's in your top 10 is Reed Detmers. And I know the Angels have maybe suggested that they aren't looking to try to trade he or Soriano, and clearly I think Soriano would cost more. Detmers is fascinating because he's been great this year, but we all kind of also know what the last few years have been like. Can you really buy into the idea that if you're targeting Reed Detmers, that you're definitively getting someone that is definitely going to be at the top of your rotation next year and it's worth paying a real price for him? Or is there too much risk for you to be paying a real price for Reed Detmers?
Yeah, no, I think that is a good question. But one thing that happened when Detmers was a reliever was that he discovered a strategy that worked against righties. He's a lefty where it's a fastball and a slider that are his best weapons, and they are good weapons. But, you're thinking, oh, a fastball slider lefty, like what does he do against righties? The nice thing is that his slider is what do you call a gyro slider? It is a bullet slider. It is the kind of slider that actually works to opposite-handed hitters. It is not a big sweeper. It is not, a big movement slider. Those kind of tight, less movement sliders, those kind of sliders work. And so what he's done against righties is to kind of really ramp up that slider usage and get to almost 50-50 with the fastball and the slider. He's naturally more dominant against lefties. And he's figured something out against righties. I understand being tepid about it,
yeah.
And I would hope that would reduce the price. But it is the kind of thing where he might cost less than Joe Ryan if they decide in Anaheim that they're going to, change things up. And so you might get the same kind of upside where you're getting a number two, a real number two. And you're not spending the same price for it.
Oh, it feels like when I think about it, it feels like the next in the line of Flaherty, Rogers, Boz. Like that just sort of feels like the type of pitcher that the Orioles would target and say, hey, we went and got it.
Let's hope it works out better.
That's the issue that you mentioned at the beginning of the year, like, hey, they've taken swings, and you're right, but it's so clearly not been the big swing, right? Like they've so clearly not done that. And I know that they were in the market.
Well, Corbin Burns.
Other than the 1 year of Corbin Burns. You're 100% right.
Yeah.
1 year of Corbin Burns
Which was
a big
the one
swing.
that worked out the best.
Yes, definitively. It's just that all of a sudden they couldn't score a run in the second half of the season, and it really burned them. But that to me is the part that I keep coming back to, and it's sort of the reason why I'm willing to entertain the Adley Rutschman conversation, which is I don't think you can sell. I know you bring up that Rangers team, but it's really hard to sell me on this is a legitimate World Series contender without that true top of the rotation type guy. And so like I come back to, are you going to do that? Because if you go out and get Joe Ryan this year at the deadline, then hell yeah. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I can buy it. I can buy that you can put this thing together to be a World Series contender in 2027. But if it's another Jack Flaherty, Trevor Rogers type, it just feels like you're trying to do just enough to be competitive. And then I might have to talk to you about asset valuation and doing the best overall thing for the franchise, which is really boring and sounds very nerdy. It's so nerdy.
We are circling actually something exciting. Let me ask you a question.
Okay.
How much pressure do you think there is on Mike Elias and his front office, given that they've had 8 years?
It feels like there should be more, It definitely feels like there should be more. But a year ago, that it should be more pressure was instead of promotion to president. So it's hard. David Rubenstein and Michael Arrighetti aren't around. They don't seem to care all that much. So I don't know how much pressure there is on Michael Elias.
Well, let's say I felt a little bit of pressure, and maybe it was just internal pressure. I'm Mike Elias, and I'm like, dang, like come on.
Now,
like,
I want to win
you
a
know,
World Series. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'm going to take every chance I can get. Then the most exciting thing, and I think maybe you've been hinting at this, but I could maybe see this happening, was that they do both, because you're saying they don't have the assets to get Adley. They don't have the assets. Do they even have the assets to get Detmers? They definitely maybe don't have the assets to get Ryan.
Right.
Well, you can get the assets to get Ryan by selling Rutschman. So maybe you basically kind of do a 3-year, a three-way trade, or like a
Two
buying
trades that
while
are basically
selling.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
And
I'm interested in that, by the way. I
that's kind of I mean, you're taking advantage of what's going on. You're building for next year as much as you're building for the rest of this year, and you're doing the thing that GMs and presidents of baseball officers love to do the most. You are threading the needle.
And they do have a lot of players that they need to put on the 40-man roster next year to protect from the Rule 5 draft that they're not going to be able to get all of them on, so it makes sense to be doing buying to some extent. You're speaking my language, Eno Sarris. You're speaking. Look, and for what it's worth, I don't want to be the Tampa Bay Rays because I do want to spend money at some point, but this is kind of what they were exceptionally good at, is manipulating.
Doing everything.
Exactly,
Yeah.
the comings and the goings. And I'm not opposed to that part, just, mixing in spending. I want to be adding the Pete Alonsos of the world from time to time, which the Orioles did.
But one thing, the Rays are really interesting because it does seem like they have a core identity, that there's a couple things that they do really well. They get guys who hit the ball hard. They don't actually care if they hit them in the air. They just get guys who hit the ball hard and make contact. And so, they kind of make contact, hit the ball hard, put it in play, try to run a little bit, play some old school baseball. That's what they do on offense. And on pitching, they seem to have some stuff dialed in. The pitchers kind of go there and get better, and, then you go over and you look at Baltimore, and the core identity I thought that they were developing was like, we develop our prospects to the top ends of their outcomes. Like they come through our minor league system and they are well developed. But I just wrote a piece recently with Ricciaroli about how the Orioles are the most injured, one of the 3 most injured teams in baseball, and this has been going on for a while. So now you have to wonder if some of these player development processes are leading to injuries over and over again. And you've in some of these prospects you thought were can't miss and looked like for a while were amazing.
Yep.
Have taken a step back. Like, I thought Gunnar was going to have an MVP by now.
Yep.
Honestly.
Yep. You and I both.
Yeah.
Man. You and I both. Maybe not MVP because, at the time, Shohei existed and Aaron Judge still. But I get it. That. But we talk about him in that.
But like him or Bobby Witt. Like I at one point I would have been like, yeah, okay, either guy.
Yep. I get it. I completely get it. Real quick, if the Orioles are in this similar position, if this is about where they are, right, like a little bit under 500, around 500, right on the fringe, is there a world, I feel like at that point you have to hold on to your guys. Like you have to hold on to Rogers. You probably have to hold on to Helsley. Could you still maybe look to move like a Taylor Ward? Could you justify, even if you're in it, doing some selling just because it makes the most sense to do that?
Yeah, I think also you have to think about the narrative, what the media narrative is. So, let's say Beavers comes back and is playing well.
Mm-hmm.
Then you say, hey, we're trying to make room for Beavers or whatever it is, So there could be something like that. You could even say, internally, you could look at the projections and say, wow, like Beavers projects to be the same or better, because Ward's bat speed has really fallen off, and he is a really good plate approach, but in terms of power, it's not really there. So you might have internal projections that say, well, actually, Beavers be the same or better.
Right.
So, let's see if we can get something for next year for Ward. So, yeah, I could see. I think they will probably do some, not the Rutschman plan, but some tepid buying and selling at the same time is probably what will happen. But it would be kind of fun if they did the Rutschman for Ryan.
I'm listening.
By a couple teams.
I'm listening. Not because I want to sell Adley Rutschman, but because I'm interested in how you best set yourself up.
He's not going to extend with them, right? Like know this by now, because so many people have extended.
Yes, you would assume that if you got this deep. I mean, I guess it's a little bit more unique with catchers because you're not talking about $300 million, but
Right.
I don't know. At Eno Sarris, that's how you follow him. Of course, The Athletic is where you see his stuff, and we've linked up the big board. Is there anything else we can plug for you, man?
Now I got a big story coming up early next week, so just look out for that.
All right. I look forward to it already. Appreciate you, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.